It's trigonometry time. All right, we did this last year, so what we're going to start with to begin with is just a review of everything SOHCAHTOA that we did with right angle triangles in grade 9. So if you're forgetting what we did and how to do this, it's right here, and if you ever forget, just refer back to the very first part of this video. If you remember what we did with right angle triangles is we started with an angle. Let's say we started with this one down here on that triangle, and we said to ourselves, from that angle, what two sides am I working with? When you decide what two sides you're working with, that's when you choose whether you use sine, cosine, or tangent. Well, how do you know which one to use? Simply take a look at from your angle here. If you were using the opposite side and the hypotenuse, you would say, well, I'm going to use the sine function because it's opposite over, right there, it's opposite over hypotenuse. So there's my equation. Sine of theta, theta being the variable used for angles. Sometimes you'll see x. Sine of theta is opposite over hypotenuse. Cosine of theta is adjacent over hypotenuse. And tangent of theta is opposite over adjacent. And if you ever forget again, they're all right here, right? First minute and a half of the video. So you can just come back to this and go to that spot. All right. Getting right into it, we're not going to spend much time here listening to me. Getting right into it, if I'm going to try to solve for x with this particular equation, or this particular triangle, if I know that triangle or that angle is 58 degrees, I say to myself, from that angle, what two sides am I working with? Well, in this case, I'm working with those two sides, one being the adjacent and the other being the hypotenuse. So I go to SOHCAHTOA and I say, well, which one of those is A and H? And it's cosine. So I set up the equation. Cos of 58 equals adjacent, which is the x in this case, over a hypotenuse, which is 6.5. So there's my equation. And like I said in grade 9, this right there is the hard part. Once you get that established, now it's just algebra. So what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to multiply both sides by 6.5 to get rid of the fraction. I'll multiply this by 6.5, and I'll end up with 6.5 cosine of 58 equals x. And so all I do now is make sure my calculator is set to degrees, and I punch this into a calculator, 6.5 times the cosine of 58, and I get an answer of 3.4. So x equals 3.4. And now all I got to make sure I do is I check some reasonability, and we always talked about that last year. There's your answer. Is that a reasonable answer? Well, yeah, it is, because if this is 3.4, it is less than the hypotenuse, which we know has to be true. Hypotenuse is the longest side in every triangle. Here's a different one. And again, I start at the angle that I'm given, or the one I'm looking for. In this case, it's given. And I say, well, from that angle, what two sides am I working with? Well, in this case, I'm working with the opposite side in the hypotenuse, which is that part of the SOHCAHTOA. So I know I'm using the sine function. So I simply put down sine of 62 because the angle always goes with the function. And again, I set up the ratio according to this. Opposite, which is 10.7, over hypotenuse. So in this case is x. And then again, once I've got the equation set up, now it's just algebra. So I'm going to multiply both sides by x to get rid of the fraction. Now when your x is in your denominator, like it is here, you're going to have an extra algebraic step that you have to worry about. And so when I clean this up, I get x times the sine of 62 equals 10.7. Well, I want to isolate x, so that forces me to divide both sides by sine of 62. And again, once you start getting into these, if you have trouble with how to find side, when the x is on the bottom, come back to the video and take a look. So x equals that. So now I grab my calculator, not before, and I punch in, that's a 10 by the way, 10.7 divided by the sine of 62. And that gives me an answer of 12.1, which again, I check for reasonability, and that is a reasonable answer because the hypotenuse has to be the longest side of any triangle, right triangle anyways, and it is. That answer is longer than 10.7, so I have to trust myself that I did it right. Here's another example. In this case, we don't know what the angle is. So there's what I'm looking for. And again, theta is just a variable, Greek letter that sometimes is substituted for x. So in this case, I'm going to set up my equation. I say, same questions. From the angle I'm looking for, what two sides am I working with? Well, in this case, I'm working with the opposite and the adjacent. And that is the tangent function. Opposite and adjacent. So I set up my equation. Tangent of x, or theta, is opposite over adjacent. And you'll notice here that I've got no sense cross multiplying or dividing or multiplying both sides by 9.1, because when I do that and I divide, I'm going to end up right back where I am. So if I've got a fraction that I can actually work with, I'm going to divide that out. And so if you remember, when you don't know the angle, and this is what some of us will have trouble with, tangent to the -1. The inverse tangent function is what I'm going to use. And what we did last year is we just simply set it up and took a shortcut and said, well, x is going to be the second function of tangent of 5.2 over 9.1. Now, if you've got a graphing calculator or a calculator that displays the work, you type this in as it appears, which is right here. Type that in, and just remember your brackets, and you should be good to go. If you have a calculator that doesn't display the work, then you're going to have to figure out this decimal first, then hit the second, or hit that, figure out what that decimal is or that fraction is, then hit your second function tangent. Either way, when you do this, you should get an answer of 29.7 degrees. And again, we're going to make sure our calculators are set to degrees. And so this is the answer that I should come up with right there. And again, is it reasonable? Well, it's reasonable, yes, because this side is smaller than that side. So I know, if you remember your rules about triangles, this angle has to be less than 45. If this angle is 45, these two sides, this side would be the same as this side. But since this one's smaller, that means that angle has to be smaller than 45. And in this case, it is. And then the last one. And I chose this. This is the textbook you're going to be working in right away. The peak-to-peak gondola connects two mountain ski resorts, Whistler and Blackcomb. I chose this because by the time you watch this, I could be on that. We're going to be there. So in this case, what we're looking for, and I'll just draw this a little bit better so it's not quite, not bright enough. There's the triangle that we're given. And so this distance is 4,400 meters. And they're telling me the cable from there to there is 4,600, which means that one length on this is going to be 2,300. And it's asking me to determine the approximate angle that the cable makes with horizontal. So they're wanting me to figure out that angle of depression right there. All right? So in doing that, what I'll do is I'll set up the ratio. And I'll say, okay, from this angle right here, from that angle, I'm working with the adjacent side and the hypotenuse, which in this case is going to be a cosine. So I would hammer out cos of x is going to be 2,200, because that distance here is going to be 2,200 if the whole thing is 44, divided by 2,300. And again, I'm looking for the angle in this case, and I've got to use the inverse function. So I would say that x is going to equal cos to the -1 of 2,200 divided by 2,300. All right, and again, if you have a graphing calculator or one that displays work, this is exactly what you punch in. If you don't, and I'll just do this one, you'd figure out what this decimal is, and to 4 decimals, it's 0.9565. So then I hit the second function of that. So cos to the -1 of 0.9565 gives me an angle of 17.0 degrees. It's actually 16.95 or something like that, but I'm going to round it off to the nearest tenth. So 17 degrees is what that angle is. Okay? So there's your basic review, so to speak, of how to figure this out. What I want you to do is I want you to grab these textbooks. These are the ones we used last year. And they're found like I say right here, right behind, on the top shelf behind where Sam and Casey sit. All right, I want you to work on these questions. 136, they're all trigonometry questions, they're all grade 10 questions. And then just please remember, I don't want these things leaving the room. So if you're not done, just finish it tomorrow in class. And then put them back on the shelf as you see them. They're nice and neat up there right now. So, and there should be enough for everybody. One or two may have to share, but there should be enough for everybody to work through. All right. Most of you have that. If you're having trouble, text me and I will respond. I might not respond right away, but I will respond. Okay? Good luck, and we'll take a look at the next video in a second.